After his mother's death, the billionaire's son fell into depression until the Black Maid's Act changed everything. After the sudden death of his mother, young Ethan's world collapsed in silence. The mansion, once full of warmth and laughter, became a cold and heavy place where every wall whispered memories of what was lost. Ethan, the only son of a billionaire, could not find a way to cope. He stopped going to school, ignored his friends, and locked himself away from his father. His meals went untouched, his voice grew faint, and the sparkle in his eyes faded until it seemed as though he was only a shadow of the boy he used to be. The staff worried as they watched him fall deeper into grief, but no one dared to step in. No one except Grace, the black maid who had served the family faithfully for years. She knew pain when she saw it, for she herself had once walked through the fire of loss, and though her position was simple, her heart carried the wisdom of healing. One evening, she noticed Ethan sitting quietly by the piano, staring at it as if it was both a friend and an enemy. That piano had belonged to his mother, the very instrument she used to fill the house with songs. It had been untouched since the funeral, dust gathering on the keys like silence on Ethan's heart. Without asking, Grace walked over and began gently wiping it clean, her hands moving with care. Then, softly, she hummed one of the songs Ethan's mother used to play. The melody floated through the room like a memory reborn, and for the first time in weeks, Ethan looked up. He did not speak, but his eyes followed her, listening. That small act was more powerful than any words. She had reminded him that love was not gone, only waiting to be remembered. The days that followed carried change in small doses. Grace began to share little moments with Ethan, cooking his mother's favorite meals, telling him stories of resilience, teaching him that grief was not about forgetting but about carrying love forward. She invited him into the garden his mother once cared for, showing him how to plant flowers that would bloom year after year, living reminders of her presence. Slowly, Ethan began to open up. His laughter returned in pieces, his appetite grew back, and he even placed his fingers on the piano again. The music was not perfect, but it was alive, and with each note he played, his heart stitched itself back together. Months later, during a family gathering, Ethan surprised everyone. Sitting at the piano, he performed his mother's favorite piece. The room fell silent, and his father's eyes filled with tears as he listened. The song carried the weight of grief, but also the light of love reborn. When the final note faded, Ethan looked at Grace and whispered, "Thank you, you gave me back my life." From that day forward, she was no longer seen as just a maid. She was the heart that helped a broken boy find his way back to life, proving that sometimes it is the quietest act of kindness that changes everything. After the passing of his mother, young Ethan's world fell into darkness. The mansion, once filled with music, laughter, and warmth, became unbearably quiet. Every corner of the house reminded him of her voice, her touch, and her love, and instead of bringing comfort, those memories pierced him deeper. Ethan, the only son of a wealthy billionaire, shut himself away. He stopped going to school, ignored his father's efforts to reach him, and spent most of his days locked in his room. Food went untouched, his body grew weaker, and the spark in his eyes faded into emptiness. The household staff watched silently, whispering in concern, but no one dared to intrude on the boy's grief. Among them was Grace, the black maid who had faithfully served the family for years. She had seen loss before and knew the silent weight of grief, and though her role in the household was simple, her heart carried strength and compassion. 1. Evening, Ethan sat alone in the grand living room, his eyes fixed on the piano his mother once loved to play. The instrument was covered in dust, untouched since the funeral, yet it still seemed to breathe her presence. Grace quietly walked in and noticed the boy's gaze. Without asking permission, she approached the piano, carefully dusted its keys, and softly began to hum a tune his mother used to play. Her voice was gentle, carrying notes of comfort and memory. Ethan, startled at first, slowly turned his head. For the first time in weeks, his attention lifted from his grief. Grace did not pressure him to speak or smile. Instead, through her small act, she reminded him that his mother's memory still lived in the melodies, in the food she loved, in the flowers she planted, and in every act of love that remained. From that moment, something in Ethan began to shift. Grace would sit with him in silence, sometimes sharing her own stories of loss and resilience, teaching him that grief did not mean forgetting. It meant carrying love forward. She cooked his mother's favorite meals and the familiar smells, filled the kitchen with warmth. She guided him to the garden, showing him how to care for the flowers his mother once planted, explaining that life continues to bloom even after sorrow. Slowly, Ethan's heart began to heal. He started eating again, his laughter returned in fragments, and eventually he sat at the piano. His fingers stumbled across the keys, but with each note he played, his spirit grew stronger. Months later, during a family gathering, Ethan surprised everyone by sitting at the piano and playing his mother's favorite piece. The room fell silent, and his father's eyes filled with tears as the music carried both grief and love together. When the final note faded, Ethan turned to Grace and whispered, "Thank you. You gave me back my life." From that day, she was no longer seen as just a maid, but as the light that had guided a broken boy back from despair. Her act of kindness proved that sometimes it is not wealth or power that saves us, but the smallest act of love that changes everything. After his mother's sudden passing, Ethan's world turned gray. The mansion where he lived with his father became unbearably silent, the kind of silence that pressed down on every corner of the house. Once, laughter, music, and warmth filled the rooms, but now only echoes of memories remained. Ethan, the son of a billionaire, withdrew from everyone. He shut himself in his room, refused to eat, ignored his father, and pushed away anyone who tried to comfort him. His schoolbooks gathered dust, his friends stopped calling, and the piano, his mother, once played, sat untouched, covered in layers of quiet sorrow. The staff of the mansion whispered in worry but stayed at a distance, unsure how to reach the boy. Yet one person, Grace, the black maid who had served the family faithfully for years, could not watch him sink further. She too had known loss in her life, and though her role in the house was humble, her heart carried a strength and compassion that wealth could never buy. One evening, as Ethan sat alone staring at the forgotten piano, Grace entered quietly. She did not ask him to talk or demand that he move forward. Instead, she picked up a cloth and gently wiped the dust from the keys. Then, in a soft voice, she hummed one of his mother's favorite songs. The melody floated through the air, wrapping the room in a warmth Ethan thought he had lost forever. He turned his head slowly, watching her, and for the first time in weeks, his heavy gaze lifted. Grace said nothing, but her act spoke louder than words. In that moment, Ethan realized that his mother's memory was not gone. It lived on through the things she loved, the music she played, and the kindness she left behind. In the days that followed, Grace became his quiet companion. She cooked his mother's favorite meals, filling the house with familiar smells that brought a strange comfort. She took him to the garden, showing him how to plant flowers just as his mother once had, teaching him that life, though fragile, always found a way to bloom again. She shared her own stories of loss and resilience, reminding him that grief was not about letting go, but about carrying love forward. Slowly, Ethan began to change. He ate again, smiled in fragments, and eventually sat at the piano. At first, his fingers stumbled clumsily, but Grace listened with patience, and little by little the music returned, not perfect, but full of heart. Months later, during a family gathering, Ethan surprised everyone. He sat at the piano and played his mother's favorite piece. The room fell silent as the melody rose, carrying both sorrow and love. His father's eyes filled with tears, and when the last note faded, Ethan turned to Grace and whispered, "Thank you. You gave me back my life." From that day forward, she was no longer seen as just a maid, but as the light who healed a broken boy with nothing more than love, patience, and kindness. After the sudden death of his mother, young Ethan's world was shattered. The enormous mansion where he lived with his father, once filled with warmth and music, now felt like a hollow shell echoing with painful memories. Ethan withdrew into himself, shutting his door to everyone, refusing food, skipping school, and ignoring every attempt his father made to comfort him. The piano his mother once played sat untouched, gathering dust like the boy's spirit. The staff of the mansion whispered about how he was fading, but no one dared to step too close. Only Grace, the black maid who had worked in the household for years, watched quietly with a heart full of empathy. She had known grief in her own life and could see in Ethan the same emptiness she once felt. Though she was not family by blood, her compassion made her unable to stand by any longer. One quiet evening, Grace entered the living room where Ethan sat staring at the abandoned piano. She didn't try to speak or offer empty words. Instead, she began to gently clean the instrument, her hands brushing away weeks of dust. Then, in a soft voice, she hummed one of his mother's favorite songs, a melody that used to fill the halls with joy. The notes carried warmth into the silence, and Ethan's gaze lifted slowly toward her. For the first time since the funeral, he felt a small spark of connection, as if his mother's love had returned in that sound. Grace did not push him, but through her quiet act she showed him that grief did not erase love. It only asked to be remembered. Over the following days, Grace continued her gentle work of healing. She cooked the meals his mother once loved, filling the home with scents that stirred both memory and comfort. She guided Ethan into the garden, showing him how to tend to the flowers his mother had planted, reminding him that life continues to bloom even after loss. At times, she shared her own stories of pain, of losing people she loved, but she also spoke of strength, of carrying their memory forward with courage. Slowly, Ethan began to change. He ate again, he laughed in small moments, and he sat at the piano, pressing hesitant keys. The music was broken at first, but each note carried hope, and little by little, his heart began to heal. Months later, during a family gathering, Ethan surprised everyone by sitting at the piano. The room fell silent as he played his mother's favorite piece, not with her flawless skill, but with deep emotion that filled every corner of the hall. His father's eyes filled with tears, and the staff listened in awe. When the final note faded, Ethan turned to Grace and whispered, "Thank you. You gave me back my life." From that day, she was no longer just a maid in the mansion. She was a guiding light, proof that even the smallest act of kindness can heal the deepest wounds, and that love, when shared, has the power to bring life back to the broken.